Hey guys, welcome back to another Q&A it is December 28th, 2020. So this one was really long in terms of number of questions and just depth of questions. So I'm going to probably split this one into two parts. So we will do the first part today and then get the second part here soon. All right, let's see. All right, first one. First one is, I've heard plenty of times that traps and delts have increased androgen response, and that's why AAS users grow theirs so much more than naturals. How true is this statement? To what extent is it possible for naturals to grow their delts and traps in the same way? Well, I mean, yeah. So there are going to be differences in androgen receptor density in just different areas of the body. That happens to be one of them. And I mean, can a natural grow those muscles? I mean, sure, it's part of it is structure too, especially with the traps. I mean, generally like your wider clavicle type of people have a little harder time growing more traps because they're kind of spread out, and also their traps do less work, and they tend to do less work in like lat movements or back movements, and also shoulder movements, like a lateral motion. That's why you often see kind of people with a narrower shoulder structure have like these really big traps, but sometimes struggle with the delt or like the medial delt development. And that's not always across the board. It's just kind of a structural thing. So that's one thing. And secondly, just like anything else, muscle growth is always genetics. I mean, there's always going to be that genetic component, whether they're enhanced or not. Third, figuring out what kind of stimulus the delts respond to is always going to matter either way. So yeah, I mean, they can still grow their delts for sure. Now, are people with the androgen response have some kind of advantage? Yeah, potentially, but that's not to say that a person, a natural person, couldn't grow their delts. I mean, there's plenty of examples of people with delts that are not enhanced. Okay. Let's see. Can you explain GDAs and how they work, how effective they are, and when and how they should be used? Okay, so GDA, or glucose disposal agent. Now, that term is used, but it's kind of a broad category, because some ingredients will be an insulin mimetic, so they're actually like a shuttling agent. They're mimicking insulin's actions. Some will lower hepatic glucose output, so something like berberine. Some will actually help make the actual cells more sensitive to the insulin. So I mean, they do different things, right? There's different mechanisms within the GDA category. They're not all just shuttling agents. They don't all just act like an insulin mimetic. So you're going to want to probably use a product that covers those main bases, and in clinical doses. And how you use them, man, there's a whole bunch of ways that you can use them. You're never really going to go wrong by supporting your pancreatic function and supporting your insulin sensitivity or supporting your hepatic glucose output. You're never really going to go wrong doing any of that. So because you use them all the time, sure. Are there times that you are going to be more insulin sensitive than others, that maybe maybe it's not as advantageous to use them and you can save money and not use them? I mean, sure, yeah, right? When you're leaner, when you're, depleted, and so on and so forth. So when and how would be budget related and also context related. So, I mean, potentially you could use them all the time. It wouldn't really be deleterious to do so, assuming you're not doing something like chromium, for example. You're not, giving yourself chromium toxicity because you're intaking, like milligrams of it per day. So yeah, there's not really a set way to use them, but people will generally use them with the higher the intake, that's when they'll use them, or during around higher meals. So the problem is that it's hard to say, yes, you need, you have X product and you need, I'll give you an example. So I like to, since I work with Morphogen, I like to use the Morphodrive. It is a 6-cap serving to get the entirety of the ingredient profile. Okay. Now, do you need to use 6 caps with every single meal that contains carbohydrate? No. Okay. Is there over 50 grams of carbs, you should use this many, or under 50 grams of carbs, you should use this many type of thing? Also, no. And the reason is because everyone's sensitivity is going to be different. So generally, people that eat more carbohydrates and do better on a higher carbohydrate type of scenario generally have better insulin sensitivity anyhow. I mean, that's why they are good glucose metabolizers in the first place. And that's why they probably thrive in that environment. So while it might look like they are eating more carbohydrate and you would think, oh, they need a higher GDA, their insulin requirements might even be less than somebody that is eating less carbohydrate or less food than them, which is also possible. So no, it's not really like, this many carbs take this much. It's more so, well, here's the ingredients, here's the dosages, spread it out in a way that makes sense based on your diet. Okay, so for example, if we're taking the full 6 capsule dose in a day and we have 3 meals that are our primary carbohydrate meals, 2 per meal. Okay, that's going to still be helpful, right? We're still getting in the clinical dosing. So that's kind of the way that you're going to need to look at it versus take this much per this many grams of carbs, because again, we have those other variables that I mentioned. So let's see. I'll do one more here on this one. How can someone who considers themselves not very academically gifted go about not only finding but reading and understanding and then practically applying studies done on topics in the general realm of bodybuilding? There's going to be some parts of that are difficult. The main part is going to be practically applying studies done on topics in the general realm of bodybuilding. And why is that difficult? Well, because we have to look at our sample size, right? So who was the study done on, right? What was the population? What was their experience? Do we know anything about the people really, other than, just basic controls? The application part gets really skewed because even though a study may say something, we may do something else that works better than what the study says. So does that mean the study's wrong? Well, maybe not. It really just depends on the context of the study. So, I mean, we'll put it this way. A lot of times with studies, especially pertaining to things like training, for example, or really anything in this realm, they're things that have already been done. All it's really doing is confirming things that people have probably already been thinking and doing and using for some time. Okay, so it's not to say that you're going to never have a study that kind of finds anything brand new, because it could happen. It just doesn't happen very often. So a lot of the things that are already being done are being studied way later and we say, oh yeah, that works. Well, we already really knew that, but here is maybe why it works, or here is how to make it work a little bit better, or something like that. So I mean, finding stuff, yeah, I mean, you can just look around the internet, go on PubMed and different similar websites, and you can find things if you look. It's just, you know, there will be some things that are locked, like full text studies and stuff that you can't really get unless you have access. But in general, I mean, you can find things. It's just you're going to find a lot of things that are conflicting. You're going to find a lot of things that maybe weren't set up very well. You're going to find a lot of things that are open-ended, that are maybe vague, that don't really talk about, you know, every situation. That's why it's like, always take these things with a grain of salt. Like, there are things that are useful, right, to us in a study scenario. For example, so refeeding, okay? We have some good literature that shows that it takes probably at least a certain amount of time to elicit a really positive hormonal and metabolic response from refeeding. That's something that we can use pretty easily, right? And we can see whether or not it works, right, when we use it. A different example would be training. Well, the one study shows, you know, some of the studies that were like 30 sets to failure in training. It's like, how do we really interpret that? Because, I mean, yeah, you could do 30 sets to failure, but anything past like your first couple sets or so to failure your performance is gonna dive. So like, what benefit are we getting from this? What is the consequence long term? How long could we actually do that? Or would we be, you know, would our nervous system be completely debilitated for 3-4 weeks, right? So like, what's the consequence in the long-term outcome of that? So I mean, it just depends on what you're looking at to apply. I mean, I'm always going to look for, you know, I like studies. I think the research is helpful in some cases. It maybe helps us, like I said, understand certain things better. But I'm always going to look at, well, what's actually working? And I want to figure out why it's working. And I can normally look at mechanisms and figure out why something works versus needing a study to know why, right? So that's kind of my take on that. I wouldn't like live and die by any of that stuff. You will really shortchange yourself big time. Even people that are research minded, that are what you call the evidence-based crowd, they're going to tell you the same thing. If somebody says they're living and dying by everything in the research, then they don't have much experience, or they're very close-minded as to how things work, because there's always a lot of context. I can give you endless examples. I mean, we could say metabolic adaptation. Someone telling me there's 10% metabolic adaptations about maximum. Well, then how do we take, you know, this person that eats 5,000 calories and they end up at 1,500 calories and they actually increased activity level during that time? Like, how do you explain that, right? Sure, there's other things. They're lighter body weight, so they're burning less calories with movement, probably. Even if their NEAT levels are matched, they're probably burning less calories in that total activity. But still, like, there's no way to explain that a 10% adaptation there. It's much, much greater. So yeah, I mean, it's, again, I'm kind of rambling, but my point is that I wouldn't even, like, honestly, if it were now and I was starting out and I'm giving someone advice as to how to learn, it wouldn't be looking at studies. That wouldn't be the first thing. That would probably be one of the last things that we're going to look at, because there's plenty of people, or there are at least some people that are putting out information that is already kind of weeding through all that bullshit. So that's really what I would look at. So I hope that helps. All right. Can adrenal fatigue have a direct effect on body composition, even if all the variables of training and dieting stay the same? Well, in the, if we're looking at like the basis of thermodynamics, calories in and calories out, then, we're going to say no, but there's a couple additional things we're going to consider. So like body composition, how do we actually, cosmetically, how do we look? Could it change that? Yeah, for sure. I mean, because for one, we're talking about adrenal function, so we're talking about aldosterone levels changing and water retention and mineral balance changing, so that could make us look different. We're talking about something that probably drives a lot of inflammation, so that could make us look different. We're also talking about, if we're talking about purely weight loss, maybe, maybe not, but if we're talking about how you actually look, then sure, because if generally with adrenal fatigue, we're talking about a whole system and feedback loop of hormones that are going to be downregulated that are probably going to additionally cause us to maybe even lose more muscle tissue, not store glycogen as well, so like that 5 or 10 pounds that we lost might not been as much actual fat loss as we would normally have in an otherwise healthy hormonal environment. So yeah, for sure. And plus, like if you have legit, really bad adrenal fatigue, like we're talking like adrenal insufficiency, you're not going to be able to maintain training for very long unless you just train like a weenie. It's like you just won't be able to, because your CNS is just tanked. So my answer is going to be yes. From a cosmetic standpoint, definitely, absolutely yes. It would definitely have an effect. You could still maintain obviously the same caloric expenditure and the same overall caloric intake and things like that. You could, but you're just going to have a lot of other variables playing into the overall outcome. Okay, probably do one more here. Okay. Metal Detox. They're asking about how to metal detox, I think. Let's see. Yes, how to metal detox. So, well, first off, why would you want to do this? Well, metals and minerals and things, they can accumulate in tissues. They can have toxicity, right? Now, the one thing about metals is they can be an exposure issue. So people that work around these things often, it can be a metabolism issue where you're not detoxing and basically leaching out these substances. So there's a couple potential reasons that you could have a metal toxicity, and there can be quite a few different metals that you are basically have an overabundance of, right? It's not just one or two things. I mean, there are quite a few. So I couldn't sit here and tell you exactly what to do, really. I don't, without seeing like a stool analysis or something like that to show, or like at least a hair test or something to really show what's going on. But just as a general outline, we have a few major things that we need to accomplish. So we need to try to leach this stuff out, and a type of like chelation therapy, whether it's like a suppository or somebody using like IP6, which can help kind of leach these things out, like charcoal, things like that. We're also going to need to know what the heck we're trying to leach out, because we want to support the other metals and minerals in the body as well. So we may need to supplement with the other things, because a lot of these agents will just pull everything out, right? So they'll pull out what we don't want, but they're also going to pull out what we do want. So we need to potentially need to replace. Also, these things store in multiple tissues in the body. So The liver is really kind of like the main hub for detox. And so we need to make sure we're supporting liver detoxification, you know, things like glutathione or, you know, NAC, which can definitely raise glutathione levels. The brain, based on what your symptoms are, you may need to support those symptoms with additional supplementation. The brain can definitely collect them, and then other tissues collect these metals as well. So we need to get rid of them, we need to replace things, and we need to try to figure out where the exposure came from, if possible. So that's really all I can say without like knowing without this particular situation, because there are different metals that you can have toxicity towards, and there could be potentially differences in protocols. So this person on Instagram, you can feel free, if you would like, you can reach out. I'd be more than happy to do a consult with you and look things over, and try to get you going in the right direction on this. This can be kind of a time-consuming process to get rid of, but yeah, metal toxicity, especially when it gets severe, can have some pretty bad side effects. So definitely reach out if you need to. Okay. Yeah, definitely going to do 2 parts. There's still like 5 or 6 more questions. So we'll split that into part 2, and we'll talk to you guys soon.